In the cold light of a morning, a luxury car emerges from the dirt road and stops by the riverbank. The engine turns off, and a man in an impeccable suit gets out without looking back. From the back seat, a young woman who has fainted is quickly removed and left on the damp grass, her feet almost touching the water. He sweeps his eyes around, makes sure of the silence, and returns to the steering wheel. From between the trees, a German shepherd appears, stopping a few steps from the scene. The animal slowly approaches, fixing its gaze on the still young woman. For a second, the air seems to freeze. But what that second meant, no one would understand so soon. Do you love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thanks for joining us. Now let's get back to our story. The dirt road, surrounded by dense trees, lay silent that morning in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. The distant sound of a motor echoed for a few seconds before dissolving into the crisp autumn air. At the point where the noise had ceased, a luxury car, gleaming despite the dust coating its surface, stopped abruptly beside the riverbank. From within, a man of impeccable appearance descended, his clothes and posture betraying wealth and influence that seemed out of place in these remote woods. Richard Blackwood adjusted his expensive suit jacket as he surveyed the secluded area. With calculating eyes, the Pisgah River flowed steadily beside them, its waters deceptively calm, yet harboring currents that had claimed the unwary for generations. He moved with purposeful urgency around the vehicle, his Italian leather shoes crunching softly on the fallen leaves that carpeted the forest floor. Opening the rear door, Richard's movements became swift and decisive as he carefully lifted an unconscious young woman from the back seat. Emily Chen, barely 23, lay limp in his arms, her pale skin contrasting sharply with her simple, wrinkled sundress. Her long black hair fell in disheveled waves across her face, and her breathing remained shallow but steady. The yellow fabric of her dress, once bright and cheerful, now appeared muted against the earthen backdrop of the wilderness. Richard glanced around with practiced caution, his businessman's instincts ensuring complete privacy for this desperate act. The remoteness of this location had been chosen deliberately, miles from the nearest hiking trail, accessible only by the old logging road he had just traveled. Satisfied that no witnesses lurked among the towering pines and ancient oaks, he gently placed Emily on the damp grass near the water's edge, positioning her close enough that the gentle lapping of the river nearly touched her bare feet. For a moment that stretched like an eternity, Richard remained motionless, staring down at the young woman who had once been central to his carefully constructed world. His jaw tightened as conflicting emotions played across his features: regret, desperation, and something that might have been genuine sorrow. The morning mist rising from the water seemed to echo the fog that had descended over his judgment in recent weeks, leading to this unthinkable moment. The sound of his expensive watch ticking seemed unnaturally loud in the forest's silence. Each second that passed increased the risk of discovery, yet Richard found himself reluctant to complete this final abandonment. Emily's face, peaceful in unconsciousness, reminded him of better times when their relationship had held promise rather than peril. But those days belonged to a past he could no longer afford to remember. With visible effort, Richard forced himself into motion, returning to his vehicle with measured steps that betrayed none of the turmoil raging within. The car door slammed with a finality that seemed to seal Emily's fate, and the engine roared to life with mechanical indifference to the human drama unfolding beside these ancient waters. Gravel scattered beneath expensive tires as the luxury sedan accelerated down the dirt road, carrying its owner back toward a world where such desperate measures could be rationalized as necessary evils. The tranquil current concealed dangers that few understood. This particular stretch of the Pisgah River was notorious among locals for its treacherous undertows, capable of pulling even strong swimmers into its depths without warning. The riverbed here dropped sharply just a few feet from shore, creating powerful currents that had earned this area the whispered nickname Devil's Bend among the mountain folk. Richard seemed to count on this natural hazard to complete what he could not bring himself to finish personally. However, what the fleeing businessman could not have anticipated was that mere minutes after his departure, a different sound would interrupt the forest's returned silence. Between the shifting shadows cast by towering evergreens, a magnificent German shepherd emerged with the fluid grace of a natural predator. The dog's alert brown eyes swept the scene with intelligent assessment, his powerful frame moving with purpose through the undergrowth that would have challenged a human's passage. Rex, as he was known to his solitary master, possessed the keen instincts of his breed, refined by years of freedom in these mountains. His acute hearing had detected the unusual sounds of the car's arrival and departure, prompting an investigation that would prove fateful for the unconscious young woman lying vulnerable beside the water. As he approached Emily's still form, his nostrils flared to capture every scent that might reveal the nature of this unexpected discovery. The shepherd's examination was thorough and surprisingly gentle. He sniffed carefully around Emily's motionless body, his sensitive nose detecting the lingering traces of expensive cologne that clung to her clothing, evidence of recent human contact. More importantly, his canine senses registered the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the faint warmth of her skin, and the steady pulse that meant life still coursed through her veins. For several long moments, Rex remained perfectly still beside the unconscious woman, his intelligent mind processing this unprecedented situation. His years of training and natural protective instincts warred with caution, creating a tension that seemed to electrify the very air around them. The forest held its breath as this unlikely guardian angel made a decision that would alter the course of several lives forever. When Rex finally moved, it was with the deliberate care of a creature who understood the gravity of his actions. He positioned himself protectively beside Emily, his massive frame creating a living barrier between her vulnerable form and the dangerous river currents that continued their relentless flow mere inches away. His alert ears swiveled constantly, monitoring the forest for any sound that might signal further danger to this helpless human who had somehow entered his domain. The German shepherd's vigil had begun, though neither he nor the unconscious young woman could possibly imagine the complex web of consequences that would spring from this moment of canine compassion. In the distance, the sound of Richard's car had long since faded, leaving only the eternal whisper of wind through pine needles and the gentle murmur of water over stone to bear witness to an act of abandonment that would ultimately prove to be something far different than intended. Rex's keen senses detected the subtle changes in Emily's breathing that indicated her condition was deteriorating in the cool mountain air. The morning mist was giving way to a chill that could prove dangerous for someone in her weakened state. Without hesitation, the German shepherd began the delicate process of moving her to safety, his powerful jaws gently gripping the fabric of her sundress as he carefully dragged her away from the treacherous riverbank. The rescue was a testament to both the dog's intelligence and his surprising gentleness. Rex paused frequently during the arduous journey, checking Emily's breathing and adjusting his grip to avoid causing any harm. His massive paws found secure footing on the uneven forest floor as he navigated fallen logs and dense undergrowth, always maintaining a steady pace that prioritized her safety over speed. The yellow sundress, already wrinkled from her ordeal, caught occasionally on thorny bushes, but Rex worked patiently to free the fabric without jarring his precious cargo. Each step took them further from the deceptive tranquility of Devils Bend and closer to the safety of higher ground. Rex's destination was clear in his canine mind. The rustic cabin where his master Jake Morrison lived in deliberate isolation from the complexities of modern society. Jake had moved to these remote mountains 5 years earlier, seeking solitude, after a career in emergency medicine had left him emotionally exhausted and yearning for simplicity. The cabin sat nestled in a clearing roughly 2 miles from the river, surrounded by towering pines that provided natural privacy and protection from the harsh mountain winters. Jake had built much of the structure himself, using lumber from trees that had fallen naturally in the forest. Solar panels, discreetly mounted on the roof, provided modest electricity, while a hand-dug well supplied fresh water. It was a sanctuary, designed for someone who had grown weary of humanity's complications. Rex's arrival, with his unexpected burden, created an unprecedented situation for both dog and master. The German Shepherd had been Jake's constant companion since his retreat to the mountains, but never before had the animal displayed such protective behavior toward a stranger. As Rex carefully positioned Emily on the cabin's covered front porch, his urgent whimpering and anxious pacing immediately caught Jake's attention from inside. Jake. Morrison emerged from his morning routine of checking weather equipment to find his usually composed canine companion in a state of visible agitation. The sight of an unconscious young woman on his porch struck him like a physical blow. Instantly, reactivating professional instincts he had thought permanently dormant. His medical training kicked in automatically as he knelt beside Emily, checking her pulse and breathing while his mind raced through possible explanations for her presence. "What have you brought me, Rex?" Jake murmured softly, his weathered hands gentle as he conducted a preliminary examination. Emily's vital signs were stable but weak, and her skin felt cold to the touch despite the warming morning sun. Most puzzling was her appearance. She was clearly not dressed for hiking or camping, and her location so far from any marked trail suggested something more complex than a simple case of someone becoming lost in the woods. Moving with practiced efficiency, Jake carefully lifted Emily and carried her inside the cabin to his bedroom, where he could better assess her condition. The rustic interior reflected his minimalist lifestyle. Handmade furniture, essential medical supplies from his former profession, and books on subjects ranging from wilderness survival to philosophy. Rex followed closely, positioning himself beside the bed with unwavering vigilance. Jake's medical examination revealed no obvious injuries, though Emily's unconscious state suggested possible head trauma, or perhaps the effects of some form of medication. Her pupils responded normally to light, and her breathing remained steady, leading him to conclude that she was likely in no immediate danger. However, the circumstances of her arrival raised troubling questions that his isolated lifestyle had not prepared him to handle. As hours passed, Jake found himself in an unfamiliar position of uncertainty. His years in emergency medicine had equipped him to handle medical crises, but this situation demanded decisions that extended far beyond clinical considerations. Should he contact authorities? The nearest sheriff's station was 40 miles away, and involving law enforcement would inevitably bring unwanted attention to his carefully guarded privacy. Yet keeping an unconscious stranger in his home without seeking proper help carried its own ethical complications. Rex's behavior provided additional mystery to the situation. The German Shepherd refused to leave Emily's side, exhibiting protective instincts that Jake had never witnessed in their 5 years together. The dog seemed to sense something about the young woman that remained invisible to human perception, creating an atmosphere of tension and anticipation that filled the usually peaceful cabin. Throughout the afternoon, Jake prepared what comfort he could for his unexpected guest. He adjusted the room's temperature, ensured she remained properly covered, and checked her vital signs every hour with the methodical precision of his medical training. His supplies included IV fluids and basic medications, though he hesitated to administer anything without understanding her condition more completely. As evening approached, Emily began showing subtle signs of returning consciousness. Her breathing deepened, and occasional muscle movements suggested her body was fighting its way back to awareness. Jake positioned himself nearby, ready to provide reassurance when she inevitably awakened confused and frightened in an unfamiliar environment. Rex maintained his vigil from the foot of the bed, his alert ears monitoring every sound from both inside and outside the cabin. The approaching sunset painted the cabin's interior in warm golden hues that seemed to promise a peaceful resolution to the day's mysterious events. However, Jake's intuition, honed by years of reading between the lines in emergency situations, suggested that Emily's arrival marked the beginning of complications rather than their resolution. The careful way Rex had transported her, the young woman's inappropriate clothing for mountain hiking, and her unexplained unconscious state all pointed towards circumstances that were far from accidental. When Emily's eyelids finally fluttered, open as darkness settled over the mountains, her initial confusion quickly gave way to fear as she struggled to comprehend her surroundings. Jake's gentle voice and professional demeanor helped calm her immediate panic. But the questions that filled her awakening mind would prove far more difficult to answer. Her memories remained fragmented and elusive, leaving gaps that would challenge both her recovery and Jake's determination to help her while protecting his own carefully constructed solitude. The night ahead would bring revelations that none of them could anticipate, setting in motion events that would test the bonds of trust between strangers and forever alter the peaceful isolation that Jake had worked so hard to achieve in these ancient mountains. Emily's awakening came in waves of disorientation that left her grasping for fragments of reality that seemed to slip away like morning mist. The unfamiliar ceiling above her, constructed from rough-hewn timber beams, provided no anchor for her scattered thoughts. Her throat felt dry as parchment, and her head throbbed with a dull ache that made concentrating on anything beyond her immediate surroundings nearly impossible. "Take your time." Jake's voice carried a professional calmness that had once soothed countless patients in hospital emergency rooms. He sat in a simple wooden chair beside the bed, maintaining enough distance to avoid seeming threatening, while remaining close enough to provide immediate assistance if needed. "You're safe here. My name is Jake Morrison, and you're in my cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains." Emily's attempts to sit up triggered a wave of dizziness that forced her back against the pillows Jake had carefully arranged. Her eyes, wide with confusion and fear, searched his face for clues about her situation. I can't remember how I got here," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. "Everything feels so foggy, like trying to see through thick glass." The German shepherd's presence at the foot of the bed drew her attention, and something about the animal's steady gaze provided an inexplicable sense of comfort. Rex's tail moved in a gentle wag when their eyes met, as if recognizing her return to consciousness brought him relief. Emily extended a trembling hand toward the dog, and Rex moved closer, allowing her to stroke his soft fur while maintaining his protective posture. "He's the one who found you," Jake explained, watching the interaction between woman and dog with fascination. "Rex brought you here from somewhere near the river. You were unconscious when he discovered you, and you've been sleeping for almost 18 hours. Jake chose his words carefully, avoiding any mention of the troubling circumstances that had likely led to her riverside abandonment. Emily's brow furrowed as she struggled to access memories that remained frustratingly elusive. Flashes of images appeared and disappeared like lightning. The interior of an expensive car, the sensation of being carried, the sound of an engine fading into distance. but each fragment raised more questions than answers, creating a puzzle with too many missing pieces to form a coherent picture. "What's my name?" Emily asked suddenly, panic creeping into her voice as she realized the fundamental gap in her recollections. "I can't remember my own name. How is that possible?" Her hands moved to her temples as if physical pressure might force the memories to surface. But the harder she tried to remember, the more elusive the information became. Jake's medical experience with head trauma cases had taught him that forcing memory recovery often proved counterproductive. "Memory loss after a traumatic event isn't uncommon," he reassured her gently. "Your mind might be protecting you from something painful. The memories will likely return gradually as you recover." He paused, studying her face carefully. "You were wearing this when Rex found you." From a nearby table, Jake retrieved Emily's simple gold bracelet, which bore an elegant engraving that read, "Emily C." The jewelry felt familiar in her hands, triggering emotional responses she couldn't quite explain. The weight of the bracelet, the smoothness of its surface, the way it caught the lamplight, all of these details felt deeply personal, yet remained disconnected from any specific memories. "Emily?" she repeated softly, testing how the name felt on her tongue. "Emily?" Something about hearing it aloud seemed right, even if she couldn't remember anyone ever calling her by that name. "But I still don't know who I am, where I came from, or why I was alone by that river." Her voice carried a mixture of frustration and growing fear as the implications of her situation became clearer. Jake prepared a simple meal of soup and bread, understanding that Emily's system would need gentle nourishment after her ordeal. As she ate slowly, he shared basic information about their location and his own background, creating a foundation of trust that would be essential for whatever challenges lay ahead. He described his former medical career and his reasons for seeking mountain solitude, painting himself as someone who understood the need to escape from complicated circumstances. However, their peaceful evening was interrupted by Rex's sudden change in behavior. The German Shepherd's ears perked up with alertness, and he moved to the cabin's front window with the fluid motion of a predator sensing danger. His low growl, barely audible but filled with warning, caused both Jake and Emily to freeze in silent apprehension. Jake approached the window cautiously, peering through the curtains at the darkened forest beyond. In the moonlight filtering through the pine trees, he could make out subtle signs that someone had been moving through the area. Broken branches at human height, disturbed undergrowth, and what appeared to be footprints in the soft earth near the cabin's perimeter. The tracks were fresh, made within the last few hours, and their pattern suggested deliberate surveillance rather than casual hiking. "What is it?" Emily whispered, though some instinct she couldn't name already provided an ominous answer. Rex's protective positioning between her and the window confirmed that whatever lurked outside posed a specific threat to her safety. The dog's behavior suggested recognition of danger that went beyond simple territorial concerns. "Someone's been watching the cabin," Jake replied quietly, his mind racing through the implications. His remote location had been chosen specifically to avoid unwanted visitors, and the likelihood of random strangers finding his property was virtually non-existent. The presence of observers so soon after Emily's mysterious arrival could hardly be coincidental. Throughout the night, Rex maintained his vigil at the window, while Jake checked and rechecked the cabin's security measures. He had installed motion sensors around the property's perimeter during his first year of residence, and the subtle indicators suggested multiple intrusions had occurred while they slept. Someone was definitely searching for Emily, though their intentions remained unclear. Emily found sleep impossible as fragmented dreams brought disturbing images that might have been memories. She saw flashes of confrontation, felt the sensation of rough hands, heard angry voices raised in heated argument. But each time she tried to focus on these glimpses into her past, they dissolved like smoke, leaving her more frustrated and frightened than before. As dawn approached, Jake discovered additional evidence of their mysterious visitors. A silk scarf, expensive and delicately perfumed, had been left hanging from a tree branch near the cabin's entrance. The fabric was damp with morning dew, but the lingering fragrance suggested it had been placed there recently. Most unsettling was the deliberate nature of its placement. This was clearly a message rather than an accident. The scarf's presence confirmed Jake's growing suspicion that Emily's situation involved far more complexity than a simple case of amnesia. Someone was actively searching for her, and their methods suggested resources and determination that made Jake increasingly uncomfortable about his ability to provide adequate protection in his isolated mountain retreat. Rex's continued agitation provided additional confirmation that the danger remained present and immediate. The German Shepherd had never displayed such sustained protective behavior, suggesting that his canine instincts detected threats that remained invisible to human senses. Whatever had originally brought Emily to the riverbank was far from over, and the peaceful sanctuary Jake had built for himself was about to become the center of a conflict he had never anticipated. 2 days had passed since the discovery of the silk scarf, and Emily's memory fragments were beginning to form disturbing patterns that she couldn't quite piece together. Jake observed her growing unease with professional concern, noting how certain sounds, particularly the distant rumble of car engines on mountain roads, caused her to startle and seek comfort in Rex's reassuring presence. The German Shepherd had become her constant guardian, rarely leaving her side and displaying an intuitive understanding of her emotional state that amazed even Jake. Meanwhile, 40 miles away in the affluent community of Asheville, Richard Blackwood was experiencing his own form of torment. The successful real estate developer had built his reputation on controlling every detail of his business and personal life, but Emily's disappearance had introduced variables he couldn't manage. His normally immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of strain, slightly wrinkled clothing, shadows under his eyes, and an uncharacteristic nervousness that his colleagues were beginning to notice. "Any word from your private investigators?" Victoria Sterling asked as she entered Richard's downtown office without waiting for his secretary's announcement. The woman commanded attention wherever she went, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, and her designer clothing suggesting wealth that rivaled Richard's own considerable fortune. However, her pale blue eyes held a coldness that contrasted sharply with her elegant exterior. Richard looked up from financial reports he'd been staring at without comprehension for the past hour. Victoria's unexpected arrival sent a familiar chill through him, reminding him of how their partnership had gradually transformed from mutual benefit to something approaching coercion. "Nothing concrete yet," he admitted reluctantly. "She seems to have vanished completely from that riverside location." Victoria's laugh held no warmth as she settled into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. "Really, Richard, I'm beginning to question your methods. Perhaps leaving her in such a remote location wasn't as clever as you initially believed." She examined her perfectly manicured nails with apparent disinterest, though Richard recognized the gesture as a sign of her growing impatience with his failure to resolve their mutual problem. "The plan was sound," Richard defended, though his voice lacked conviction. "That stretch of river is known for its dangerous currents. Any reasonable person would assume—" He couldn't bring himself to complete the sentence, even in Victoria's presence. Some remnant of his conscience still recoiled from openly discussing Emily's intended fate. "Assumptions, dear Richard, are the foundation of failure," Victoria replied smoothly. Emily Chen is far more resourceful than either of us anticipated. And now we have the additional complication of not knowing her current location or condition. She paused, allowing the implications to settle before continuing. My sources indicate that someone has been making inquiries about unusual activity in the mountain regions. We may not be the only ones searching for our missing accountant. Back at the mountain cabin, Emily was struggling with a particularly vivid dream sequence that felt more like recovered memory than imagination. She saw herself in an elegantly appointed office, her hands trembling as she pointed to discrepancies in financial documents spread across a conference table. The faces of her audience remained frustratingly blurred, but their angry voices carried clearly through the fog of her recollection. "You're certain about these calculations?" a man's voice demanded, though Emily couldn't connect it to any specific individual. "You understand the implications of what you're suggesting?" The tone carried veiled threats that made her dream self shrink back in fear, though her conviction about the mathematical evidence remained unwavering. Emily awakened with tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't immediately understand why the dream had affected her so powerfully. Jake, who had been reading in the chair beside her bed, immediately noticed her distress and offered a glass of cool water while Rex moved closer to provide his warm, comforting presence. "The memories are returning," Emily whispered, accepting Jake's gentle support as she struggled to process the emotional impact of her recollections. "I think I was trying to expose some kind of financial wrongdoing, but I can't remember specific details, just the feeling of being terrified and alone." She buried her face in Rex's thick fur, drawing strength from the animal's unwavering loyalty. Jake's medical intuition suggested that Emily's memory recovery was accelerating, possibly triggered by the stress of feeling hunted in their mountain sanctuary. He had noticed subtle changes in her behavior over the past 48 hours. Increased alertness, occasional moments of recognition when certain topics arose in conversation, and a growing sense of urgency that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep in her subconscious mind. "Whatever you discovered, it was significant enough for someone to take drastic action," Jake observed carefully. "The fact that you're being actively pursued suggests that the threat you posed hasn't diminished with your temporary memory loss." He paused, studying her face for signs of understanding. "Emily, I think we need to consider the possibility that staying here might not be safe for much longer." Rex's sudden alert posture interrupted their conversation, drawing their attention to sounds that had become all too familiar. Careful footsteps moving through the forest around their cabin. This time, however, the intrusion was more brazen, occurring in broad daylight rather than under cover of darkness. Through the window, they could see a tall man in expensive outdoor gear moving slowly through the trees, ostensibly searching for something or someone. Richard Blackwood had finally decided to conduct his own reconnaissance of the area, where Emily had been abandoned. His hired investigators had proven disappointingly ineffective, and Victoria's increasingly impatient demands for results had forced him to take personal action despite his reluctance to return to the scene of his desperate decision. The possibility that Emily might still be alive somewhere in these mountains had haunted him for days, creating a complex mixture of hope and dread that he found almost unbearable. As Richard moved closer to Jake's hidden cabin, his expensive hiking boots made more noise than he realized on the forest floor. His urban lifestyle had left him ill-equipped for stealthy movement through dense wilderness, and his nervous energy caused him to move with jerky, unnatural motions that Rex's trained senses detected immediately. The German Shepherd's low growl warned Jake and Emily to remain perfectly still while Richard passed within 50 yards of their hiding place. Emily's reaction to seeing Richard through the window was immediate and visceral. Though she couldn't yet remember his name or their specific relationship, her body responded with unmistakable fear and revulsion. Her hands began trembling uncontrollably, and her breathing became rapid and shallow, as some deep part of her mind recognized the source of her trauma. "I know him," she whispered to Jake, her voice barely audible despite the distance between them and the searching man. "I can't remember how or why, but seeing him makes me feel sick with terror. He's connected to whatever happened to me, I'm certain of it." Rex pressed closer against her legs, sensing her distress and positioning himself between Emily and the window where Richard remained visible. Jake's protective instincts, dormant since his retreat from medical practice, surged back to life as he witnessed Emily's reaction to their uninvited visitor. Whatever this well-dressed stranger represented in Emily's past, his presence clearly posed a significant threat to her psychological and possibly physical well-being. The careful way Richard searched the area suggested this was no casual hiking expedition, but rather a deliberate hunt for something specific. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Richard finally moved away from their immediate area, continuing his systematic search deeper into the forest. However, his visit had shattered the illusion of safety that the remote cabin had previously provided. Jake realized that their sanctuary had been compromised, and whatever forces were seeking, Emily possessed both the resources and determination to eventually find her hiding place. As evening approached, Jake began making preparations for a potential emergency departure. His years of wilderness living had taught him the importance of having escape plans, and he quietly assembled supplies that could sustain them if they needed to abandon the cabin quickly. Emily watched his preparations with growing understanding that their peaceful interlude was rapidly approaching its end, and that the next phase of her ordeal would require courage she wasn't certain she possessed. 3 days after Richard's unsettling reconnaissance mission, Emily experienced her first truly clear memory flashback while helping Jake gather firewood near the cabin. As she bent to pick up a fallen branch, something metallic caught her eye, partially buried in the damp earth. Her fingers closed around a small golden button, ornately designed with an intricate monogram that sent an electric shock of recognition through her consciousness. The button was clearly expensive, crafted from real gold with detailed engraving that spoke of custom tailoring and significant wealth. As Emily cleaned away the dirt with trembling fingers, the elaborate B monogram became clearly visible, surrounded by decorative flourishes that suggested old money and established family prestige. The moment she touched the polished surface, memories crashed over her like a tsunami, bringing with them emotions so intense that she gasped and nearly dropped the precious piece of evidence. "Jake!" she called urgently, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and terror that brought him running from the woodpile where he had been working. Rex immediately appeared at her side, sensing the dramatic shift in her emotional state and positioning himself protectively against her legs. "I remember something important. This button. I've seen it before, and it's connected to everything that happened to me." Jake examined the ornate button carefully, noting its obvious value and the craftsmanship that suggested it came from very expensive clothing. "Where do you remember seeing it?" he asked gently, understanding that pushing too hard for details might cause Emily's fragile memories to retreat back into the protective fog that had shielded them for the past week. Emily closed her eyes, allowing the recovered memories to flow through her consciousness without resistance. "I was in a boardroom presenting financial analysis to a group of very powerful people. The man wearing this button, his name was William Blackwood, Richard's father. He became furious when I showed them evidence of embezzlement in their family's real estate empire." Her voice grew stronger as the details became clearer, I had discovered systematic theft spanning several years, millions of dollars diverted from development projects into private accounts. The memories continued flooding back with increasing clarity and emotional impact. Emily remembered her role as a forensic accountant hired by Blackwood Development Corporation to investigate minor discrepancies in their quarterly reports. What had begun as routine audit work had uncovered a complex web of financial manipulation that reached the highest levels of the family business, implicating both Richard and his recently deceased father in elaborate fraud schemes. Richard Blackwood, she whispered, the name finally connecting to the man they had seen searching the forest. He's the one who brought me to that river. I confronted him with evidence that would have destroyed his family's reputation and sent him to prison for decades. The night before I was supposed to present my findings to federal investigators, he must have... Emily's voice trailed off as the full implications of her situation became clear. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air as he understood the gravity of Emily's recovered memories. She hadn't simply witnessed a minor business irregularity. She had uncovered evidence of major federal crimes committed by people with the resources and connections to eliminate threats to their freedom. Her presence at the riverside hadn't been accidental abandonment, but rather a desperate attempt to silence a witness whose testimony could destroy lives and fortunes. Meanwhile, in Asheville, Victoria Sterling was growing increasingly impatient. With Richard's inability to resolve their Emily Chen problem, she paced the length of his office like a caged predator, her elegant heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor in a sound that Richard had come to associate with impending danger to his carefully constructed world. Your bumbling attempts at wilderness reconnaissance have accomplished nothing except to confirm our worst fears, Victoria stated with icy precision. Emily is not only alive, but she's being protected by someone with enough wilderness expertise to keep her hidden from your pathetic investigators. She paused before his desk, her pale eyes boring into his with an intensity that made him visibly uncomfortable. Richard loosened his silk tie, feeling the weight of Victoria's displeasure like a physical presence in the room. We don't even know for certain that she's recovered her memories, he protested weakly. The head trauma might have permanently affected her ability to recall the financial evidence she had compiled. Really, Richard, your naive optimism is almost charming, Victoria replied with a laugh that held no warmth. Emily Chen has a reputation for meticulous record-keeping and photographic memory when it comes to financial details. Do you seriously believe that a minor concussion would permanently erase years of professional training and natural talent? She leaned forward, placing her manicured hands flat on his desk. More importantly, are you prepared to stake your freedom on such wishful thinking? Victoria's involvement in the Blackwood financial empire had begun 2 years earlier, when she approached Richard with what appeared to be a legitimate business proposal. Her Sterling Investment Group had offered to provide private funding for several high-profile development projects, allowing the Blackwood Corporation to expand more rapidly than traditional banking relationships would permit. What Richard hadn't understood until much later was that Victoria's funding came with strings attached that gradually transformed their business partnership into something approaching indentured servitude. I've made arrangements with certain contacts who specialize in resolving delicate situations, Victoria continued, her tone suggesting that she was discussing weather rather than what Richard suspected were threats of violence. However, their methods tend to be somewhat more permanent than your amateur riverside theatrics. Once they become involved, there will be no possibility of changing our minds about Emily's fate. Back at the mountain cabin, Emily was experiencing additional memory recovery that filled in crucial details about her investigation. She remembered discovering that Victoria Sterling's investment group was actually a sophisticated money laundering operation, using the Blackwood Corporation's legitimate development projects to process funds from various illegal activities. The elegant businesswoman who had charmed Asheville's social circles was actually the architect of a criminal enterprise that dwarfed the Blackwood family's relatively simple embezzlement schemes. Victoria Sterling. Emily spoke the name aloud, for the first time since her memory recovery, and the words seemed to carry physical weight that made Rex growl softly in response. She's the real danger, not Richard. He's just a weak man who got in over his head with someone far more ruthless than he ever imagined possible. Emily's hands shook as she remembered her final confrontation with Victoria, when the woman's charming facade had slipped to reveal something cold and calculating that had genuinely terrified her. Jake listened to Emily's expanding recollections with growing concern for their safety. If her memories were accurate, they were dealing with organized criminal activity at a level that his isolated mountain lifestyle had never prepared him to handle. The resources and connections that Victoria Sterling apparently possessed made their remote cabin seem more like a temporary delay than a genuine sanctuary. "We need to leave tonight," Jake announced with quiet certainty, his medical training helping him remain calm despite the escalating danger. "If they're as resourceful as you remember, they'll eventually find this place through systematic searching or technological surveillance. Our only advantage is mobility and the fact that they don't yet know we're traveling together." Emily nodded her agreement, though the prospect of abandoning their temporary safety filled her with dread she couldn't entirely suppress. Rex seemed to sense their decision to flee, moving restlessly around the cabin and occasionally pausing to stare out windows as if he could detect approaching threats that remained invisible to human senses. The golden button clutched in Emily's palm had restored her memory, but also confirmed that their enemies possessed both the motivation and capability to pursue them relentlessly until the threat she represented was permanently eliminated. As darkness settled over the Blue Ridge Mountains, Jake began implementing the emergency evacuation plan he had hoped never to use, while Emily struggled to prepare herself mentally for a flight into uncertainty that would test every resource they possessed for survival and every bond of trust that had developed between them during their brief time together in the wilderness sanctuary that could no longer protect them from the dangers that were rapidly closing in from all directions. The evacuation began at midnight, under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for their desperate escape from the compromised mountain sanctuary. Jake had spent years preparing for various emergency scenarios, but never had he imagined fleeing with an injured woman and his loyal German shepherd from pursuers with the resources and determination that Emily's recovered memories had revealed. Every sound in the forest seemed amplified as they made their way carefully down the hidden trail that Jake had maintained as an alternate route away from his cabin. Emily carried only essential items in the lightweight backpack Jake had prepared for her, including the crucial golden button that had triggered her memory recovery and might serve as vital evidence if they ever reached safety. Rex moved silently beside them, his acute senses monitoring their surroundings for any sign of the human predators who had been systematically searching the mountain regions. The German shepherd's behavior had become increasingly protective over the past few days, suggesting that his canine instincts detected dangers that remained beyond human perception. Their destination was an abandoned firewatch tower approximately 8 miles deeper into the wilderness, accessible only by hiking, trails that would challenge even experienced mountaineers. Jake had discovered the location during his second year in the mountains and had quietly prepared it as an emergency shelter, storing supplies and establishing communication equipment that could reach the outside world if necessary. The tower's elevation would provide both defensive advantages and the cellular coverage needed to contact federal authorities if Emily's evidence proved sufficient to guarantee their protection. However, their carefully planned escape was complicated by Emily's gradual realization that simply hiding would never resolve their situation. Victoria Sterling's criminal organization possessed too many resources and too much motivation to eventually locate them, regardless of how remote their hiding place might be. As they hiked through the darkness, Emily found herself considering options that her week of memory loss had prevented her from contemplating earlier. "Jake," she whispered during one of their rest stops, her voice barely audible above the night sounds of the forest. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I don't believe running away will solve anything. Victoria Sterling has connections that reach into government agencies and law enforcement. Even if we contact the FBI, there's no guarantee that our information won't be compromised before we can testify." Jake studied her face in the dim starlight, filtering through the pine canopy, noting the determined expression that had replaced the confused fear of her first days at his cabin. Emily's memory recovery had restored not only her recollections of recent events, but also her natural courage and analytical intelligence that had made her such an effective forensic accountant. The woman who had once fearlessly confronted powerful criminals with documentary evidence was beginning to reassert herself despite the trauma she had endured. "What are you suggesting?" Jake asked quietly, though some part of him already suspected the direction of her thoughts. His years of emergency medicine had taught him to recognize when patients were preparing to make difficult decisions that would fundamentally alter their circumstances, and Emily's expression carried that same mixture of resolution and apprehension. Before Emily could respond, Rex's sudden alertness froze them both in place. The German Shepherd's ears rotated forward as he detected sounds that human hearing couldn't perceive, his muscular frame tensing with predatory readiness. Through the forest darkness, they could hear the distant murmur of voices and the careful footsteps of multiple people moving through the undergrowth with deliberate coordination that suggested professional search techniques. Richard Blackwood had finally decided to commit substantial resources to locating Emily, hiring a team of private security specialists with military backgrounds to conduct a systematic sweep of the mountain region. The expensive operation had been Victoria's idea, though she had made it clear that Richard would bear full financial responsibility for the team's services. More ominously, she had also specified that the searchers were authorized to use whatever methods they deemed necessary to resolve the situation permanently. The search team's leader, a former Special Forces operative named Marcus Webb, had studied topographical maps of the region and identified several locations where a fugitive might seek shelter. Jake's cabin had been discovered empty, but still warm, indicating that their quarry had departed recently and probably remained within a limited radius. Webb's tactical experience suggested that the fugitives would head toward higher ground, where defensive positions and communication advantages might be available. Emily, Jake, and Rex found themselves trapped between the approaching search team and a steep ravine that would be treacherous to navigate in darkness. Their only option was to take cover behind a fallen pine tree and hope that the searchers would pass without detecting their presence. Rex settled into a crouch beside Emily, his breathing controlled and silent as he had been trained during his younger years working with law enforcement agencies before Jake adopted him from a retired K-9 unit. Richard Blackwood accompanied the search team despite Marcus Webb's professional recommendation that civilians remain at base camp. His guilt over Emily's abandonment at the riverside had evolved into an obsessive need to personally witness the resolution of their mutual problem. However, his urban lifestyle and emotional state made him a liability in the wilderness environment, and his labored breathing and clumsy movements threatened to compromise the team's stealth approach. When the searchers passed within 20 feet of their hiding place, Emily made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of remaining hidden until the danger passed, she stood up and stepped into the moonlight where Richard could see her clearly. Her action was so unexpected that the search team momentarily froze, uncertain whether this was surrender or some form of tactical maneuver they hadn't anticipated. "Hello, Richard," Emily said calmly, her voice carrying across the small clearing with startling clarity. "I remember everything now, every transaction, every forged document, every illegal transfer that you and your father processed through Sterling Investment Group. I also remember Victoria's threats the night before you decided to abandon me at Devil's Bend." Richard's face went pale in the dim light as he realized that his worst fears had materialized. Emily's memory had fully recovered, and her presence here meant that she had found allies willing to help her survive and potentially testify against the criminal conspiracy that had consumed his family's business empire. The confident forensic accountant who had terrified him with her meticulous evidence was standing before him again, but now she carried the additional advantage of understanding exactly how far he had been willing to go to silence her testimony. "Emily, you have to understand," Richard began desperately, his voice cracking under the emotional strain of their confrontation. "Victoria Sterling forced me into this situation. She has information that would destroy my family completely, and she made it clear that your continued existence posed an unacceptable risk to all of us." His words tumbled out in a rush as he tried to explain decisions that he knew were inexcusable, regardless of the pressures that had motivated them. Marcus Webb's professional instincts recognized that the situation had shifted beyond simple apprehension into something more complex and potentially dangerous. His client's obvious, emotional involvement with the target suggested complications that might compromise the mission's objectives. More importantly, the young woman's calm demeanor and strategic positioning indicated that she might have prepared contingencies that the search team hadn't anticipated. Rex's sudden movement provided the answer to that question as the German Shepherd emerged from the shadows with silent grace, positioning himself between Emily and the search team with unmistakable protective intent. The animal's presence immediately altered the tactical balance, creating uncertainty about whether other defenders might be concealed in the surrounding darkness. Marcus Webb's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm while he reassessed the situation's potential for violence. Jake's voice cut through the tension from a position the searchers hadn't detected, confirming their fears about additional opposition. "Gentlemen, I suggest you reconsider your approach to this situation," he called from somewhere in the tree line. "Emily has already transmitted copies of her evidence to multiple federal agencies through secure channels. Her current safety is the only thing preventing those agencies from receiving detailed information about the illegal activities she uncovered." The bluff was calculated but risky, relying on the searchers' uncertainty about Jake's capabilities and Emily's actual preparations. In reality, they had no communication equipment and no way to contact outside authorities from their current position. However, Emily's confident expression and Richard's visible panic lent credibility to Jake's claims, creating enough doubt to prevent immediate aggressive action from the search team. Victoria Sterling's voice crackled through Marcus Webb's radio communication system, cutting through the mountain air with icy precision that left no doubt about her growing impatience with the operation's complications. "Mr. Webb, My clients are paying substantial fees for results, not wilderness therapy sessions. I trust you understand the importance of completing your mission objectives within the specified time frame. The radio transmission confirmed Emily's worst suspicions about Victoria's involvement in their pursuit, while also revealing the level of coordination that had been deployed against them. However, it also provided her with crucial intelligence about the criminal organization's communication methods and operational structure that might prove valuable if they survived the immediate confrontation to testify before federal authorities. As dawn approached over the Blue Ridge Mountains, the standoff between hunters and hunted reached a critical point where decisions made in the next few minutes would determine whether Emily's evidence would ever reach the courtrooms where it could serve justice, or whether the wilderness would claim additional victims to protect the secrets that had already cost so many people their safety and freedom. The mountain standoff reached its turning point when Richard Blackwood made a decision that surprised everyone present, including himself. Faced with Emily's calm determination and the mounting evidence of Victoria Sterling's manipulation, something fundamental shifted in his conscience. The guilt that had tormented him since abandoning Emily at Devil's Bend finally overwhelmed his fear of Victoria's threats, leading him to an act of courage that would ultimately save them all. "Marcus, stand down," Richard commanded with authority. That surprised the former Special Forces operative. "I'm terminating this operation immediately. Ms. Chen, I owe you an explanation and an apology that can never adequately address what I put you through." His voice carried genuine remorse as he stepped forward, with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender rather than aggression. Victoria's voice exploded through the radio with fury that could be heard clearly across the mountain clearing. "Richard, you spineless fool, do you have any idea what you're destroying? My organization has invested years in establishing these financial networks, and I will not allow your sudden attack of conscience to compromise everything we've built together." However, Richard had already made his choice. Reaching into his jacket pocket, he withdrew a digital recording device that he had been secretly carrying for the past month. "Emily, everything Victoria has said to me about your situation has been recorded. Her threats, her plans, her admission of the money laundering operation. It's all documented evidence that federal prosecutors can use to build their case." The recording device represented Richard's insurance policy against Victoria's increasingly dangerous demands, though he had never intended to use it as a weapon against the criminal conspiracy that had ensnared his family's business. His decision to record their conversations had been motivated by self-preservation, but Emily's unexpected survival had transformed his evidence into an opportunity for redemption rather than mere protection. Marcus Webb found himself in an unprecedented professional situation as his client effectively surrendered to the very target he had been hired to apprehend. His military background had prepared him for many contingencies, but not for a mission that dissolved due to his employer's change of heart. After a moment of tactical uncertainty, he made the pragmatic decision to withdraw his team rather than continue an operation that had lost both legal authorization and clear objectives. Emily accepted Richard's recording device with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and emotional overwhelm. The small electronic unit represented vindication for everything she had endured, validation of her professional integrity, and evidence that could protect countless future victims from Victoria Sterling's criminal enterprise. More importantly, it meant that her testimony alone would no longer bear the entire burden of exposing the conspiracy. "There's something else you need to know," Richard continued, his confession gaining momentum as the weight of months of deception lifted from his shoulders. Victoria Sterling isn't just money laundering through real estate development. She's been using our projects to hide assets for several organized criminal groups, and she has contacts in law enforcement agencies who have been protecting her operations for years. Your evidence threatens an entire network of corruption. Jake emerged from his concealed position in the tree line, his medical instincts automatically assessing everyone present for signs of injury or extreme stress. Rex remained alert, but relaxed his aggressive posture as the German Shepherd's remarkable intuition recognized that the immediate threat had passed. The crisis that had begun with Emily's abandonment at the riverside was finally approaching resolution through truth rather than violence. The next few hours brought a cascade of revelations as Richard provided detailed information about Victoria's criminal network, including names, locations, and financial records that he had secretly copied as protection against her increasingly unreasonable demands. His cooperation transformed the case from Emily's word against a powerful conspiracy into a comprehensive investigation with multiple sources of evidence and documentation. Federal agents arrived at the mountain location within 6 hours of Emily's call to the FBI field office in Charlotte, their response expedited by the gravity of the evidence she described and the multi-jurisdictional nature of Victoria's criminal activities. The agents found Emily, Jake, and Richard waiting calmly at the abandoned fire tower, while Rex maintained his protective position beside the woman he had saved from the riverside and continued to guard throughout their mountain ordeal. Victoria Sterling's arrest occurred simultaneously at her Asheville offices as federal agents executed search warrants based on Emily's evidence and Richard's recordings. The elegant businesswoman who had terrorized Richard into desperate actions maintained her composure even as handcuffs were applied, though her pale blue eyes burned with fury that seemed to promise retribution despite her circumstances. Her carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled as investigators uncovered the full scope of her money laundering operation. The legal proceedings that followed vindicated Emily's professional reputation and courage while exposing a criminal conspiracy that had corrupted legitimate businesses across 3 states. Victoria Sterling's conviction on multiple federal charges effectively dismantled her money laundering network and led to additional arrests of corrupt officials who had facilitated her operations. Richard Blackwood's cooperation with prosecutors earned him a reduced sentence and the opportunity to rebuild his family's business empire on legitimate foundations. For Emily, the resolution of the criminal case marked the beginning of a new chapter rather than simply the end of a nightmare. Her expertise in forensic accounting had been proven under the most extreme circumstances imaginable, leading to job offers from federal agencies and prestigious private firms. However, the experience had also taught her valuable lessons about what truly mattered in life, lessons that influenced her decision about where to build her future. Jake's mountain sanctuary had been irreparably compromised by the events of recent weeks, but his growing relationship with Emily provided compelling reasons to consider relocating closer to civilization. The isolation that had once represented healing from his medical career's emotional toll now seemed less important than the connection he had discovered with someone who shared his values of integrity and compassion. Rex, who had initiated their relationship by rescuing Emily from the riverside, seemed to approve of the developing romance between his master and the woman he had chosen to protect. 6 months later, Emily and Jake were married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and federal agents who had worked on the Sterling investigation. Rex served as an unofficial ring bearer, his dignity somewhat compromised by the formal bow tie that Emily insisted he wear for the occasion. The German Shepherd's heroic actions had been recognized by several law enforcement agencies, though His most important reward was the expansion of his pack to include Emily as a permanent member of his family. Their new home in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains provided the perfect balance between Jake's love of wilderness and Emily's need for professional opportunities. She established a consulting practice specializing in financial crimes investigation, while Jake returned to emergency medicine at a rural hospital that served the mountain communities he had grown to love. Rex adapted to their new lifestyle, with characteristic German Shepherd flexibility, though he maintained his protective instincts and never completely relaxed his vigilance over Emily's safety. The golden button that had triggered Emily's memory recovery was preserved as evidence in Victoria's trial, but Emily kept a photograph of it as a reminder of how small details can uncover massive truths. Her experience had taught her that courage sometimes emerges from the most desperate circumstances, and that the bonds formed during crisis can become the foundation for lifetime happiness. Richard Blackwood eventually rebuilt his real estate empire using legitimate business practices, driven by his desire to honor his father's original vision before Victoria's corruption had distorted their family legacy. He maintained periodic contact with Emily and Jake. Their relationship transformed from antagonist and victim into something approaching friendship based on mutual respect for the courage they had all discovered within themselves. Victoria Sterling's appeal of her conviction was denied, and she began serving a 25-year federal sentence in a maximum security facility far from the mountain wilderness where her criminal empire had finally crumbled. Her elegant facade had been permanently stripped away, revealing the calculating predator that Emily's investigation had first detected in the financial records that started everything. As Emily reflected on their remarkable journey from Riverside, abandonment to mountain wedding, she realized that Rex's decision to save her life had ultimately saved them all. The German Shepherd's loyalty and courage had created the opportunity for truth to emerge, for redemption to flourish, and for love to develop between two people who might never have met under ordinary circumstances. Dear viewers, we hope Emily and Jake's incredible journey has touched your hearts and reminded you that even in our darkest moments, courage and compassion can light the way forward. Their story of survival, truth, and unexpected love shows us that heroes sometimes have four paws and that redemption is always possible for those brave enough to choose the right path. If this tale of mountain mysteries and second chances has captivated you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up to help others discover these powerful stories of human resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments below about which moment moved you most. Was it Rex's heroic rescue, Richard's courageous redemption, or Emily and Jake's beautiful love story born from adversity? Don't miss our upcoming stories that explore the extraordinary strength found in ordinary people facing impossible circumstances. Until next time, remember that every ending can become a new beginning when we choose hope over fear and truth over convenience.